Okay, Chewie, let's get into it. I think she managed to stay awake for most of the day, maybe not all of the day, going to, I think the technical term is the infrastructure wankfest. I think that's the technical term from Labour. Barbara Edmonds. Barbara, kia ora, good evening.
Tēnā korua and tēnā koutou to all the BHN viewers and listeners tonight.
Did I get the official name? Yeah, is it right?
Yeah. Infrastructure Investment Summit. Yeah, I think it was Investment Summit, and then it changed to Infrastructure Investment Summit. I don't know, but I was there today. But also I was having a lot of what they would say in these sort of circles called polar sides.
Oh.
You know, where you go and meet with people off the side of the conference. I had quite a few of those today and got some tomorrow lined up. And then I also had a round table with actually our domestic infrastructure sector as well at a firm.
Do you find this kind of stuff interesting? Like, we love talking to Craig Rennie. He is a complete nerd for political stuff, but he loves it. Do you love this kind of stuff, or are you like keeping yourself awake and just, getting through it?
I to be fair, I love people. I do like talking to people as well. It's a really good trait to have if you're a politician. But also, the most interesting thing I always find out about this is actually you find out what people are doing. And you realise, the world keeps turning.
One of the ones I was going to ask you specifically about was we hear that BlackRock is there. And BlackRock has got a bit of an interesting name in New Zealand at the moment, particularly to do with a solar company that they sort of pulled out of, and there's a whole bunch of people still expecting to maybe see some money. How do we feel about companies who have a track record that's not so positive in New Zealand at this conference, having this government say, come and spend more of your money? Is there any kind of, what's the word, like grinding against that? Is there a problem there?
I don't know if BlackRock are there, and someone has asked me that before, and I said I didn't actually know if they're going to be there. I haven't met them either. I know Chris Hipkins has been pretty strong about it, and I've also reaffirmed that as well, that for those sort of foreign investors, you're going to come to New Zealand and bring your investment in, then there has to be clear benefits to New Zealand. And Chippy has also said, they should honour those employment agreements that they had with, with those Kiwi workers. So I don't know if they're there, but there will always be a tension. There's always a tension for us, me sitting there and trying to hold my tongue, as you do, because we're not in Parliament and you've got to be polite. But, Labour's been really clear for a long time that, yes, we welcome foreign investment, but there has to be a clear benefit to New Zealand, and there has to be protections for our assets. Because,
Let's delve into that shortly. The first thing, though, is this idea of this conference. I mean, there are some on the left kind of pointing to Mr. Luxon saying New Zealand is open for business, meaning he's ready to privatise everything. But you're also saying, we're open to international investment. Where is there a juxtaposition there? How do we do this to benefit New Zealand and not like do another, what's it called, Chewie? The freeway just north of Wellington. I forget the name of it as I'm trying to speak
Transmission Gully.
Transmission Gully, because that wasn't the PPP that turned into the PPP nightmare. How do we do infrastructure with ultimately international money and still win? Like, the ledger still works more for New Zealand than it does for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, for a PPP to work for Labour to even consider it, it needs to be cheaper than what the current option is, but also create jobs, right? And so PPP, the PPP for Transmission Gully, the report that was done on it was that successive governments changed the contract as the new governments came in, and that led to some of the cost overblow that happened, as well as a pandemic that also happened during the build time. So my thing has always been get it right at the start, so that, and this is where that bipartisan stuff is starting to come through a lot. And we're calling on the government to brief us, because it's like, we want to have a considered position, because we know the impact of when you stop and start projects. You fellas stopped and started a whole bunch of projects. We've got 13,000 less construction roles. We've got 72,000 Kiwis that have left our shores. So get it right from the start, so that we have this long-term sustainable investment in New Zealand that creates jobs, keeps the benefits, and actually it's not just a plunder of our assets and taking the profits offshore.
Can I ask you an honest question then? Because you set up a very good frame of getting it right from the start. Does that mean Labour kind of cocked up the ferries as well? Because that seems like at the start it was set up to be a certain thing, and then it expanded, and then it expanded, and then we all know that it's not what they're pointing it to be, but it's it's infrastructure around the wharfs and stuff. Was that not set up very well at the start either?
It was some of the information around the geotechnical work that needed to be done.
Okay.
So again, that's why business cases are really important in those feasibility studies. So if you think about Transmission Gully, $40 million was put in by the Helen Clark government for Transmission Gully to do the feasibility study. Then obviously John Key came in. They tried to take mana off Labour when there was that by-election with Hekia Parata and Chris Farfoy. So they said, oh, spades in the ground, we're going to do Transmission Gully. But actually, the continuance of it has gone through successive governments. There were some stuff-ups around Transmission Gully for the changes of, the things that you had to do, but also the information that came at hand. Some of it does come at a later time, but you got to get as much of it right from the start as possible.
Well, that makes me think as well about other contracts, for example, that have been signed recently. Like, we're looking at school lunches, and it's not necessarily why you're here to talk about, but we heard from John Prendergast yesterday, the Trust Health Chief Executive, who was doing school lunches before the change, that these school lunches are now more like $5 school lunches, because even though the contract says $3, intermediate schools are now getting $3.84 because that's what they need. And then schools are getting more money for the delivery, and then schools are getting more money for the cleanup. So is that an example? Because what I want to do is, so please, business daddy, who is the best negotiator in the country, show us these contracts that say $3 meals. Why the hell are we paying $5? I mean, you need to pay $5, but based on what they want to do, what they say they can do, they're not obviously doing that at the moment because costs have gone out. Is that another example of not doing the work at the start and then having to pay more at the end?
Well, absolutely, for school lunches, right? And when Labour brought that in, it was a pilot first before it was extended to everyone else. There was a range of which we funded it from between $5 to $8.50.
Yep.
And then this government said, well, we're going to shave off $130 million, and because we've spoken to these people, we can get it for $3. But it was clear they didn't actually think about, okay, well, who's going to deliver the food? Who's going to distribute it within the schools? Because there was clear, that's why you have a pilot program. So it was a definite fail by this government for a government that claims they're going to deliver things better.
Yeah, we heard from a principal they were paying between $1,500 and $2,000 a week. It was the week, Chewie, just to get people in the school in charge of delivering the meals around and taking care of it. So that's actually another, let's just split the middle and say $90,000 a year of costs that aren't on National's ledger. So yeah, we see all that. Chewie, you should come in here and ask some questions, and I'll shut up.
Yes. Look, National have been talking a big game about getting this bipartisan infrastructure group going, and I've always found that a bit sus, because they seem to be, especially this time around, the ones with the axe over all of these infrastructure projects, and it is very much short-term savings versus long-term planning, I guess. So, I mean, you guys seem to be trying to build a bridge and go, hey, let's build some bridges in the future. How much do you think that they're going to stick to that?
Bipartisanship has to come both ways. So announcing a project like they did today with Waikiria Prison and saying the build's going to be a PPP. Well, we came out with a PR in the last couple of hours saying we don't support that. We don't support PPPs for critical infrastructure, and prisons is one thing which we believe is a critical infrastructure. What's a critical infrastructure? It's a social infrastructure. It's something where the government has a duty of care towards people in their care. So whether that's children at a school, whether it's sick people in a hospital, whether they're prisoners, the government has a duty to care for them. And critical infrastructure, another one would be the ferries. It's critical because it's the state highway one between the North and the South Islands. So we don't support PPPs for that at all. So that's not bipartisanship where you just announce something and then expect us to agree with it. If they want us to have that considered view, they need to brief us on.
There was an article, I think, towards the end of last year where it was mentioned that one of the problems with having these big PPPs and foreign investment coming in is that we don't retain the knowledge and the experience for these big projects. So we bring people in, we have Kiwis perhaps doing all the jobsmith work, and then everybody that's involved in planning them and doing all the engineering and all the big works fucks off overseas again. And we don't retain that knowledge, and we've just become a country that can't do those projects without having someone come in. What's your view on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why you need a certainty of pipeline of projects, so that you say to whether it's investors or to those sort of foreigners we have to bring in to help build that capability, you need to show them that there's a long pipeline, right? And that was the work that Grant Robertson had started, why he set up the Infrastructure Commission, and why we had to do the legislation to say there has to be a 30-year plan. And to Bishop's credit, Minister Bishop's credit, you know, he's carrying that work on, right? And he's involving us, at least briefing us as that work progresses. But to the capability point, yeah, we have to grow our own. And the scrapping of the workforce development councils by the government, these workforce development councils are basically private sector, public sector, working out where are the holes in our skills, where's the gaps in our skills base. So do we need more sparkies? Do we need more plumbers? Do we need more engineers? And then directing a lot of the funding towards government skills and training towards those areas to build up that capability. Again, it sort of goes with that boom-bust cycle of construction, but this is where the government's responsibility is to smooth out that cycle. So have a long-term pipeline, identify the areas where we need to basically build our skill set up in, and then 3 is basically the government smoothing out when the private sector, because of high interest rates, is not building. The government has a role to step in and keep building.
Is this an argument for something like Ministry of Works?
Chewie's favourite.
Well, that's kind of where and to be fair, that's kind of where the National Infrastructure Agency is working, right? Because actually we've gotten the difference with the Ministry of Works and what we have now is the Ministry of Works employed the people. But the National Infrastructure, we've now gone to a contracting phase where you contract that out. To make a huge structural change like that, to swing it back to a Ministry of Work, it actually, to be fair, it would take us years to get back to that capability. So, I mean, I'm really keen at looking how we can boost the National Infrastructure Agency, making sure, but it might be in the compromise that we still contract work out for those skills.
One of my favourite memories of the Ministry of Works is as a very young fella, my dad had his car parked outside his office and one of the Ministry of Works trucks crashed into it. And it appears the only way I can describe it is they had so many accidents that they had a tear tab kind of leaflet that they'd just pull off and slide under the window and write on it basically that was what they were to leave if and when they had accidents with parked vehicles and other cars. So I thought that was kind of cool. That's the story I'd show you. We just hit that car, we just leave them that and off we go.
I believe that Wellington bus drivers still have a similar system.
Barb, can we have a look at a story that came out today? Because you've been talking about PPPs, you've been talking about international money, international investment, that sort of thing. But there seems to be a little bit of scuttlebutt going around at the moment in some quarters that what this is saying is Labor is all about privatisation, and they've changed and they've basically gone Tory. Can you speak to that for the punters?
So 2 words, hell no. They're not going to. And actually, the compromise on PPP, so the newsroom article had a different heading earlier today, and our team approached them and said, hey, we've got the transcript that's not accurate. When Barb was talking about private schools and private hospitals, she was talking about private schools and private hospitals, which we currently have in New Zealand. The long position that Labor has had on PPPs is that it has to be for the right asset, but not a hard no for social infrastructure. Hard no. Again, what I took you through before. But, if you look at, for example, the City Rail Link, Labor was considering a PPP for it. Obviously, things changed. But where it has to show clear benefits for a PPP. And remember, a PPP has got a really big upfront cost because it looks across the whole value, the life of the asset. So we've said if you're going to do a PPP, it has to be for the right asset, We have to have benefits for New Zealand, and it has to be cheaper than the state doing it themselves. But it's a hard no for hospitals, schools, prisons, and critical infrastructure like the ferries.
It's interesting though, because I always think, in fact, I think there's a study out of the UK. I don't have it to hand, maybe out of the US or the UK or Canada, talking about how much more effective they've actually found their public healthcare system is, and they've drawn a direct comparison to the profit margin. That as soon as you go private, and that would be the same in PPP for the private company, is there's a section of that money they're spending which is not going on infrastructure because they're a business and they make profit and they need to make profit. Whereas if it's all public, then that can just be, no profit needed. It just goes right to the line. How can someone, I mean, we're seeing this in real time with the lunches. How could a big international company do something cheaper, including that profit margin, than we can do publicly here in New Zealand? How's it even possible?
Yeah, so some would say it is possible, and because PPPs are actually found quite commonly around the world, but there's also, it comes down to that risk threshold and the affordability threshold, which is agreed to and negotiated at right at the beginning. So if the risk is low enough, then yes, it will be cheaper for the private sector because they won't have the risk of the basically having to pay out more at a later date. So I'm assuming that's where it would be cheaper. However, the major thing for us, again, get it right from the start. And when the negotiations have to be really, really good. Like, these are large international investors who know how to negotiate. And ultimately, the government can borrow money cheaper than anyone else. But where you have to be careful is that fiscal headroom around debt for a government. And that's kind of where the IMF talked about it. They did their report, their Article 4 report on Wednesday, basically their review of sort of our economy, etc. And they said New Zealand does have a structural deficit, but there's ways to productivity. So it's not new stuff, but it's, it comes down to, I believe, that risk threshold and affordability threshold, where potentially private sector could be cheaper because the program is less riskier. But again, the government can borrow money cheaper, but it has to be, and we have to think about that structural deficit and that debt headroom that we have, just in case we have a massive earthquake or a massive natural disaster.
Okay. One thing that springs to mind, the think big projects almost bankrupted the country, like toppled governments, the whole works. But then in hindsight, we look back and we go, Jesus, thank God we went on a binge of building hydro dams and Marsden Point and all of that sort of stuff, infrastructure that had decades and decades and decades of runtime. If you're spreading the debt risk out over that length of time, it bears no consequence to what a lot of right-wing politicians talk about of like, well, you wouldn't run a household like this, would you?
It's the same thing. You're absolutely right. You're looking across the life of the asset, and when you buy a house, unless you're willing to do it as a property speculator and buy and sell within 2 years, or you're the Prime Minister and you change the law from 5 to 2 years and you can sell stuff off, you're looking at holding onto it for as long as you can. So you have to think about the life of the asset, and also it requires repairs and maintenance for that life of the asset. So it is, you're right, it's looking across how big it is, but again, politics is so short term, in the sense that we have 3 years, and it becomes such an easy political tool to say, well, that's too expensive. But it's like, just like the housing build, they talked a lot about the debt for Kāinga Ora. They didn't talk about the value of the asset.
Yeah, $25 billion worth of houses for $10 billion worth of debt seems like a pretty good deal to me.
Yeah, really good deal. And the economic benefits from housing people who need housing. So
yeah. Hey, Barbara, I was going to say, talking before about that gap of profit, I was just going to wrap that up before Chewie so rudely interrupted me with a good question about, we've got an example at the moment, which is Compass. And for us, we've been saying for a long time, these $3 lunches aren't $3 lunches because you got your profit margin in that. So they're actually $1 lunches, and we found out subsequently they are $3 lunches, and then the taxpayer. So they've done the literal definition of privatising the profits and socialising the losses. They've got the government to give money to schools for doing the other two things. So when you say it can happen and it can be cheaper, I guess many of us are nervous about that because the latest example, Compass, they can't. They say they can and they can't.
And that's where politicians have to be upfront, right? When they say, yeah, it's $3 for the lunch, but that doesn't include all the labour for it and the logistics of it. And that's why schools who were really running successful lunch programs, that's what they were basically saying to the government is, how are you getting these lunches for $3 when it costs us $7 because we hire 3 local mums to be able to do the work? So, that's politics. They clearly wanted to settlements to make sure that they could pay for everything else.
Hey, on Monday night, we'll ask Uncle Chippy to give you a decent fucking internet line. I think all MPs should get it through government coffers so we don't get this buzzing in the future again. But
I'm working off.
It's fine. I'm working off, and then we don't.
I'm working off my phone. That's off my hotspot.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hey, just before you go, then a few questions from the punters. You okay with that? You're going to say yes. JC in the Pigeon Cap says, hi, Barbara, what if we taxed unproductive capital gains? Would that help encourage local capital into productive projects so we had less reliance on the offshore billionaires for our infrastructure?
It does, but it also means that we can reduce that structural deficit if we have revenue coming in at a later date, right? So absolutely, I mean, to be really simple, it does reduce reliance by reducing the amount of reliance, but it also helps us with the structural deficit that we currently have in New Zealand.
Second question, and nobody from the Labour Party watches us, so you can answer this honestly from your own personal view. CGT, yes or no, Barbara? Where are you? I don't care what Kiwi says. Where is Labour at? I don't care. Where are you at on this personally on CGT? No one will see it. You can give us your honest held belief.
So, I'm a Labour Party person, whether anyone's watching it or not. So I'm a team player. We are working on it, and we will make announcements.
Jeez, answered like a pure
see, I'm solid, man. I'm a team player.
There's a couple more in here. Junk Rig Sailor says it is obvious Luxon and Willis want to try and set up New Zealand like Ireland. So the next thing you're going to hear is proposing to drastically cut company tax rates. Do you agree with Junk Rig Sailor on that?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing as well. It's a potential drop in the corporate tax rate. So Ireland has a 15% tax rate, but also the reason why Ireland is so productive, where they're located in the world, so they have that geographical advantage. They get Eurozone subsidies, and if you want us to be like Ireland, then that means an increase in personal tax rates, a capital gains tax, and an inheritance tax. So if they want us to be like Ireland and drop the corporate tax rate, well, they can do all the other stuff that the Irish do.
And mandatory red hair dye for everybody. That would be the other thing to make us more like Ireland. Kahurangi, I think it's Kahunu. Let me get this right. Kahunu. New. I'm working on it, literally. What is Barbara's view on the new procurement? I can't even speak English. Procurement rules.
Yeah, English is my second language, so it's procurement.
I still can't say
they suck.
School!
They suck because they basically have taken away the living wage requirement for government contracted security workers, cleaners. That absolutely sucks. This is a government that's meant to be helping our lowest paid workers. So I'm not supportive of them because of that. And because as well, they're removing some of the sustainability measures. So government buildings, if they're being built, they don't have to be built to the 5-star standard. I thought we were trying to lower our emissions and be serious about climate change. The government should be leading this and not softening the rules to make it easier for businesses to basically pay people less and make it worse on our environment.
Kiwi Bird just wants to say, hi, Barbara, love your mahi, big fangirl here. So that's just from Kiwi Bird that wanted to mention it. So there you go. So last question, I guess. Well, last from me, Chewie. You can do what you want. Is there anyone you're looking forward to hearing speaking from up the front tomorrow? And what are you going to talk about specifically?
So there's Shane Jones tomorrow. The
Oh,
iwi one was good. The iwi one today was really good. I think Bishop's speaking tomorrow. I'm speaking tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to myself speaking tomorrow. And what I'm speaking on is basically people at the infrastructure sector, because of the loss of jobs and because of the loss of their work in the pipeline, they've asked us for bipartisan view, right? A bipartisan work together. They're asking for it. Doesn't matter what the government says, it's actually coming from the sector. So what they're going to hear from Labor tomorrow is, yes, we will work in a bipartisan way as much as we can. Yes, there is common ground, but there are margins or boundaries to that common ground. And I'm going to set out very clearly what Labor's boundaries are. And I've already said some of that today. It's a huge no to privatisation of hospitals, schools, and our critical infrastructure.
I think that's a really clear, sometimes, Labor gets criticised by various commentators, never us, for their messaging not being maybe as on point as it could. I think that's really good messaging. No PPPs, no privatising to critical infrastructure. I think it's really good. Before we do, though, one other one, because I missed Tane, sorry. Sounds like there was minimal mention to overseas investors about Māori business. Love to hear Barbara's thoughts. Any thoughts around that, Barbara, before we head off?
There was the iwi leaders were in the room. A number of the iwi leaders, they had a panel today. This is the thing that annoys me, is Māori are not token. They're not a token nice to have in these sort of summits. So, some of the references from the government were really light, but Māori made their presence known right throughout that summit. The porphyry, the videos, the way that they were in the room, the way iwi leaders were working with it, talking to investors and presenting. So it's up to the government will have a view that that Māori were strongly there, but from my perspective, actually their voice needed to be a lot louder and a bit more in it. But they made their presence known as iwi leaders do.
Hey, Barbara, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Anything else you want to throw out there before we head off, Chewie?
No, I'm all good. Thanks, Pat.
Have fun tomorrow. Is it strong coffees to keep yourself awake right through the day before you get on? Is that the plan?
I'm too busy to fall asleep, if I'm really frank. And I've got 8 kids, man. I've learned to operate with minimal sleep. So,
if actually the mindset of controlling children, that's about right. I think you've just hit it right at about the right level there. So, perfect. Barbara Edmonds, MP for Mana. Barbara, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and we'll talk to you super soon.
Peace out. See you.
All the best. So it's cool. It's a cool MP when they go peace out. Imagine Luxon doing that. He'd go like this. He'd go.
Don't give his social media team another idea that they'll workshop to hell.